So Threat Manager, this is the purpose of the demonstration today. Just be aware, the audience for this is IT managers, security teams, compliance, HR teams, training teams. It's not really an end user session, just want to make sure this is the right session for you. Also, Threat Manager may or may not be part of your existing iManage subscription. So if it's not, after this session, you might want it to be, but just be aware of that. Speak with your account manager if you want to have more conversations around that kind of thing. Okay, so we are going to begin. Again, remember, drop your questions in the questions area. I'll get rid of my camera and we'll just focus on the session. So starting with a few slides, I promise just a few. Why Threat Manager? So that's me looking smarter, by the way. I'm the head of client services at Ascertus. So I do a lot of things with Ascertus. I manage the consultancy team and I get involved in design, but I also do a lot of the training. That's my background. And this is quite an interesting product because we focus on the word threat. There is actually uses for Threat Manager beyond just monitoring threats. It can protect sensitive information. It can help to prevent data loss. It can help to generally increase confidence in terms of compliance and governance, but it can also help you manage, control, or at least understand risk. How does it do that? Well, in iManage work, we have lots of history. So every document and email, we can see every action performed by every person, but that's at the document and email level. So what Threat Manager does, it surfaces all of that rich data and it allows you then to monitor that activity across the business, for individuals, for teams. It allows you to create rules, it allows you to create reports. And this is why it's interesting. So yes, it can help us manage, monitor, or at least be aware of threats or potential malicious activity, but it also reveals a picture of how people actually use iManage. And this is the most interesting thing when I deliver this to my customers, the real sessions. They often think they know how their users use iManage. Threat Manager often paints a different picture. It can be quite interesting in that respect. So what we're going to cover today. So we're going to have a nice overview, and there are lots of suggested use cases here. So how might you leverage Threat Manager? We're going to look at tools for adoption and compliance. We've got tools to analyze iManage trends, system avoidance, system adoption. This is great for compliance users, HR teams, and with my training hat on, I would have loved a tool like this in my career to see who's using the system and how they're using it. We also have rules that we can create. So the rules, we've got detect and protect rules, which are proactive rules, and they're a little bit like Outlook rules. We define the criteria. What kind of activity are we interested in knowing about? But they can take actions. We can notify people, security teams, compliance teams. All rules can do that. But detect and protect rules can take action, including warning the user, and it can even disable accounts. But we also have behavior analytics. This is the real brains of Threat Manager. Threat Manager builds behavioral models for each user. It learns over time how people typically use iManage Work and other tools like Share and the mobile app. So it knows that typical behavior, and therefore it can assess what is atypical behavior. It also builds models for peer groups as well. So if we have, let's say, a guy called John in a commercial team who normally works on, let's say, 8 unique documents a day for 4 unique matters for 2 unique clients. If John suddenly downloads hundreds of documents for 30, 40 matters for 15, 20 clients, that isn't typical behavior for that person. I'd probably want to know about that if I was in a compliance or security team. That's exactly what Threat Manager can do for you. So I think largely the tool speaks for itself. So let's just jump in and let's take a look. Okay, I'm just going to refresh this. I'm using the iManage demo system. It does time out occasionally, so I just want to make sure it's all current. This is the Threat Manager dashboard. Obviously, access to this, you can decide exactly who could get to this. You can even decide exactly who can do what within Threat Manager. So people don't see everything. You can determine which role people would occupy within this Threat Manager world. Let me zoom in ever so slightly. We have a dashboard. The tiles simply repeat the options available down the left-hand side. So here we have those detect and protect rules where we can automate actions, we can generate alerts, and we can take action, disabling users, warning users. And we also have the behavioral analytics. But we can also create matter level or client level rules and reports. So if you have a particularly sensitive matters, and you really want to keep your eye on who's doing what within those matters, or you have a particularly sensitive client, perhaps a client who asks for reports, they want to know who's touching their content, the matter activity option can do that at that level. But I'm going to begin the journey in compliance. So this is all about who's using the system and how they're using the system. And I'm going to start with adoption. Now, again, this is the option certainly that I would have loved with my training hat on, but also for compliance teams, if anybody might find this interesting. It's an automated report which is generated when we click on this option. And it's based on the criteria specified at the top. We have the date range, how long, how far back should this report go, what is the scope, everybody in the business or particular teams. You can run reports for specific teams or peer groups. And we can also decide which iManage activities should be included in this report. We can tweak the details here. Every iManage activity is available here. We can even save activity sets for quick application. Okay. So the report here, what it's essentially listing is based on that criteria, based on the date range. It's ordered by the people, the users who haven't done anything in iManage, the least amount of activity. And they're arranged at the top of this list. Now, this is the iManage training demo system. So we're going to have quite a few accounts in here that haven't recently used iManage. So when you're looking at this in your own environment, are people not using iManage? That's essentially what this will do. So maybe you won't have as much, a blank activity as I have, but we have a total activity column. This is the sum of all activities defined in this activity set, and each individual activity is displayed on the right. If I click on total activities, it will flip that the other way around. Who's the most active user of iManage in the past month? So that's the total number of activities, which again is the total number of activities on the right-hand side: documents created, emails filed, documents viewed, etc., etc. And at that level, it's quite useful. Now I'm going to this global exclusions list. I'll explain more about this later, but this isn't the full picture within this environment. We can then use this report again to limit to a particular team or a particular peer group. And again, we can then, for example, I want to know who's filing the most emails in the system. Oh, it's me. I use this system quite a lot. I want to know who's creating the most documents. I want to know who's filing the fewest amount of emails. So again, at that level, it's quite useful. But it's all about monitoring how people use the system at a very high level. And everything here is reportable. So you can download this as a CSV document. You could download it as a PDF, but that's limited in terms of the number of rows, but it will generate a PDF report. And we can search for a particular individual. If I want to know what a particular person's been up to, I can see their activity specifically. So at a very high level, that's quite useful. And I've used this personally when systems have gone live for my customers to see who may not be using it or how they're using it. And again, that could be quite interesting. That's the adoption option. But we also have trending charts. Again, within that compliance group, you can create charts which give you that high-level overview of activity across the system. And they're quite easy to create. Here's some examples. Adoption over the past 6 months, covering the whole business, total number of activities, and then drilling down into those specific activities. Things can be removed from the chart. Which one's this? This is checking out documents, not particularly exciting for me, so I might want to remove that as well. And again, it's an interactive chart display. I might want to see who monitor active users. I might want to monitor active users for a particular office or a particular team. I might want to focus on a particular activity, document creation, email filing, downloads, exports. Again, you can create your own custom charts very simply. Add chart, top right corner, give it a name. Are we interested in active users or activity? Style of chart, date range, and then what's the scope? Everybody or a particular team? You would then search for your groups and you can then refine the scope of this chart and then what activities. So it's quite simple to create these. You don't need to be an iManage whiz to work this out. And this is the at the glance trending reports. Everything here can also be downloaded into a CSV for further analysis in Excel. So from a compliance perspective, that's gold dust. Again, I wish I had that years ago. But let's look at rule creation. This is where people typically use Threat Manager. There are two main types of rules: detect and protect. We define the criteria, and behavioral analytics, which we'll look at in a moment. So let me go to detect and protect rules. So when you click on rules, it will then show you the rules that exist currently, the name of the rule. Hopefully that's a meaningful name. When it was last modified, the criteria, and when the rule last ran. It will also summarize if any actions are taken as part of that rule. We can disable rules. There is a full audit trail of every rule, who's amended the rule, who created it. So we have that audit trail. But we're going to create a rule. Let's see how we would do this. Now, there are lots of use cases, the type of rules you might want to consider and create. iManage have produced this excellent guide, Threat Manager Best Practices. It's got example rules for detect and protect, why you would create them, what activity it's designed to look at, the functionality, how you would actually set it up. Same for behavioral analytics. So there's a really good toolkit here to explore. But we're going to create a new rule. Add rule, top right corner. And I give it a meaningful name. So I'm going to create a rule. I can't talk and type at the same time. That monitors privileged accounts. And this is a really important use case for detect and protect. There are certain accounts in iManage that have elevated permissions, admin permissions. There are certain accounts that are system service accounts. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Just a little bit of a cough, and I didn't want to cough in your ears. There are certain service accounts that are used maybe for workspace generation, for walls, for doing things that don't involve touching documents directly. And they're vulnerable accounts. So, and these are the accounts that probably keep IT managers up at night. You know, how do we monitor usage of these accounts and ensure, and they often have keys to the whole castle. So we can create a rule which proactively monitors those accounts. So I'm just going to call it privileged accounts or privileged accounts rule. The time zone, I'm in the UK, so that's fine. And then we set the criteria. What is it that we want to monitor, the activity that these accounts might perform that we'd like to know about? In this box, this will display every document and email activity. Printing, downloading, filing, modifications of security and profiles, exports from the system, exports to iManage Share. You can create a rule which monitors any activity. Also, document metadata activity. Certain document classifications, for example, you may have precedents and they're classified as a precedent. So you want to see if anybody's downloading or exporting precedents. So there's quite a lot of things you can apply here. Also, workspace matter metadata. So anything that you have in a metadata field, you can apply criteria against that. What I'm interested in for this rule, if people try to export or print, or mail, and you can go on, export to mobile device. If any of these privileged accounts try and take content out of the system I want to know, particularly if these accounts should never email documents, print documents, export, download, take documents offline, you can add the criteria. The trigger is if they export one or more documents. Now, that might be enough for you. If any of these accounts do that, I want to know. I'll come back to some of these other options in a moment. In the top right corner, I need to set the scope. At the moment, by default, the rules being applied to everybody in the business. I'm going to go to edit because it's not applying to everybody in the business. It might just be applied to specific admin accounts. So administrators, maybe NRT admin, the NRT admin group, if I can spell NRT. And there may be other admin groups or service accounts that you may want to include within the scope of this rule. And again, you know these accounts better than I will. That's the scope of the rule. I'll explain what this is for a little later. So if any of those accounts perform these tasks, what happens? A couple of things we can do. One is notify somebody. I can add people to the notifications list. And this might be an IT manager, or it may be a team. All of your users and groups will appear in this list, your iManage users and groups. I can also optionally take action. So when I turn this option on in the bottom left, there are two actions. I could warn the user, which isn't much use because their account's often that there is no user, it's a service account. But you could also disable the account. Now that's the risky option. Are you absolutely certain these accounts never export, print, or mail content? And if you disable them, would that have a massive impact? So typically people will monitor the alerts first before they take any of these steps. But it's quite a simple thing, really. Now, before we move on, let's look at other use cases. We'll come back and reapply this. Other rules that you might consider here are quite similar in scope. We've got a leavers rule. And this is in the recommended best practice guide. If people hand their notice in, what do they often do? Or what do they sometimes do? They may look to take certain documents with them. They may be precedents. They could be client documents, hopefully not. How do we know? Well, we can create a rule which monitors those people. Now, that might involve creating a group called leavers, or just putting people in that group, so you're just monitoring those individuals. We can then set the selection criteria. Again, if they export or print or mail or any other activity you'd want to be aware of a document, create an alert. The problem is they will need to do these things in their normal day-to-day work. That's why the rule, for example, with the precedent that I mentioned earlier might be useful. You can monitor certain document classifications. Now, this would result in a lot of alerts. So we can add filtering criteria. We can set thresholds. And we can do that based on unique documents, unique matters, or unique clients touched. So what I could say is, if somebody on that leavers group tries to export, print, mail a document, but on more than 5 unique matters in a day, or 2 unique matters in a day, or across 3 unique clients in a day, and everything here works in a 24-hour period, if they exceed that threshold in a 24-hour period, that might be something that will be a little bit more relevant. We're going to set document count. So if they try to export, print, or email 20 unique different documents in a 24-hour period, then that would generate that alert. The number I specify here is really about the sensitivity of the alert. Some people may want to have no filtering criteria. They want to have a report of every bit of activity by these users. But again, you can combine it with this filtering criteria. We can also use this to monitor data exfiltration. A lot of customers, so it could be a large data rule. They're worried about people exporting large volumes of data, similar type of criteria. but quite often it's usually small numbers of documents. It's critical documents, critical client documents, bank details. So it's small. It's a small level of activity, but it's across a wide range of matters. And that's the hacker's favorite thing. To avoid detection, they will be taking those critical documents, getting things out of the system, but they'll be doing that over a large number of matters. So again, it's using the filtering criteria, but then saying what is the risky activity we're interested in seeing. So what I'm going to do is go back and I'm going to create that privileged accounts rule. And again, I'm monitoring all of this activity. We could add more. I don't need any filtering criteria. I'm not going to take an action, but I am going to notify someone. I've specified my privileged accounts, and then I simply save and activate that rule, and it appears in the list. Now, obviously, that rule may not be triggered during this session. There are other rules, and I'll show you how the alerts will look. Again, if there's a notification, people will get an email link to this. All alerts will be listed in the alerts list. The user that triggered the alert, the date the alert was triggered, and what rule they triggered. So naming them well is quite important. Now, if a number of people monitor these alerts, they can review them, they can flag them, mark as reviewed, flag it for attention. They can even leave notes to say, oh, can you look into this, please, Dave, when you get, So again, it can help people who collaborate in teams to monitor what's been dealt with and what's not. But essentially, we need to investigate. How do we investigate? I'm going to click on an alert. It then takes me into a screen containing more detail for that individual and the alert that was triggered. Now, first things first, we can see on the right, which is very important, very useful, what IP ranges this activity took place over, which is very important to know. If sometimes we have a country code here, but still, are they IP ranges that you recognize or not? It will then show you what documents were impacted by that rule. Now, you can remind yourself on the rule settings. If you've created them, you should know, but rule details here will remind you of that criteria. If they export a certain number of documents, this is the large data exfiltration rule across 5 or more matters in a 24-hour period. So these are the documents which were impacted. Document number, name, the client name, the matter, all the metadata. Again, we've got the IP ranges that activity took place over, each individual action, all of your metadata in view. And again, that helps us to investigate the scope and scale of if it's a breach, or is it actually typical documents that people might work on. Trends though, trends. This allows us to see activity over time. This alert is 2 days old, so this chart will go back 20 days typically, and it lets you know what their typical behavior is based on the scope of the rule, the activity set in that rule. And we can see a peak of activity. On the day of this alert, they copied, they exported, they did a lot, and that's not typical behavior. We can increase this, go back 50 days. Is this something they do every month, every quarter? This is unusual behavior. And that draws our attention to it. And then below, we can then see the clients, the matters, and the documents impacted again. So which matters were impacted? 8 matters on the day of alert. Hard to see the detail here, but we can download all of this to a PDF report to send to somebody else for investigation or down into a CSV as well. It's interactive. It allows us just to explore the scope of the alert. And how do we then determine whether it is a breach or risky or malicious behavior? Well, typically conversations with people. It's not always obvious, but again, you have the toolkit for investigation here. So the alerts list is really alerting you to the fact someone breached the settings you specified. It doesn't necessarily mean it's risky behavior or malicious behavior. But again, the toolkit is there. We could mark that. It was this one. That's reviewed, all okay. I've spoken with Stephen. I've spoken with his manager. He was asked to do that on a particular day. That's okay. So detect and protect, we define the criteria. And it's like an Outlook rule in that way. and then we can take action. But the problem is you can never really create a rule for every eventuality. So this is where behavioral analytics comes into play. This is the brains of Threat Manager. Threat Manager produces a behavioral model for each individual. It knows how many unique documents, matters, clients, the kind of activities people perform over time. So it knows what's typical behavior for an individual. It also knows what's typical behavior for a peer group, the whole business, average thresholds and behaviors. So when people exhibit behavior outside of that behavioral norm, it can generate an alert, and it can reveal things, and it often reveals things you wouldn't expect. It can point to people doing things because they need training, or system avoiders, people downloading documents because there's not an integration with a system that you may not be aware of. So again, it's a really useful toolkit. Now, again, we've got lots of existing rules. Again, the best practices guide really goes into depth of the kind of things you could do here, examples of typical rules other customers use and how you would configure them. So this is the name of the rule, how often it runs. Is it continuously monitoring, or is it a report that runs every day? When the rule was last modified, when it last ran. I'm just going to create a new rule, and we'll work through a couple again of use cases here. One rule I always recommend at first is just an all users rule. It's just really casting a really wide net to see what, anomalous behavior across a whole business. Some people will create rules that are focused on a particular peer group. It may be a department. It could be rules based on the type of work they do. So all partners use iManage in a more similar way than the rest of the business. So people will create rules aimed at partners, lawyers, PAs, IT people, because their behavior is more consistent within that group, because it's based on averages, average behavior within that peer group. But an all users rule is going to cast a wide net. How often should the rule run? Is it scheduled for a particular date and time, like a report? Do I just need it when I need it? Is it something somebody asks me for every now and again? I can say, go back 3 months, go back. Typically, it's continuously monitoring activity. And it can then go back 30 days to backdate this rule as well. Everybody's included. Now, this is where we deal with this global exclusions list. There will be users of iManage whose behavior is not typical. The way they use it is very different. We call them our outliers. So people who might be outliers, people in the IT team, so help desk people will use iManage very differently. People in document production teams use iManage very differently. They work across a wide range of clients and matters. People in compliance teams, perhaps, or print rooms, perhaps. So we can add these people to an excluded list because they will skew the averages, average behavior. When we create these rules, we compare individual averages plus compared against peer group averages to assess the threat. So we can exclude these outliers because they will make the rules either more or less sensitive. And how we do that, we'll look at in a moment. So we're going all users, everybody's in scope, those outliers are excluded, going back 30 days. And again, we can send out notifications. Elevated and above, you can define what is elevated and above in terms of the risk score. And you can then decide who then should be notified again if an alert is triggered or not. Again, you would select a team, you would select an individual to add to that notifications list. But where's the criteria? There isn't any. iManage Threat Manager does all the hard thinking for you. So normally we would just say save and activate, but I'm going to take you into the advanced settings to give you a peek and help you understand how this works. Now, you don't need to do this, but let's go to advanced settings in the bottom left corner. What it does, it creates thresholds based on activity over the previous month. You can go further back to get more accurate thresholds. This is standard behavior, average use per person, average use based on the peer group we've set in the scope of this rule. So we're doing an all users rules, it's the whole business. So what this is, it shows us on average, people will on average access 5 clients, 26 documents and 6 unique matters per day. Now, bearing in mind, this is the iManage training and demo system. These numbers aren't very normal. You know, people use this system very differently than a normal iManage system. It will then say on average, the average individual average is how many documents they might delete. Again, you'd never see that on a real system. How many documents would be exported on average per person? How many email documents would be attached to emails, downloads, how many prints? And again, these numbers aren't anything like you would expect to see. It also then creates a group threshold, and this is the limit. So both of these figures determine when an alert might be triggered. If somebody exceeds the individual average, but they also exceed the group threshold, an alert will be triggered. But the risk score generated is a combination of the two. So the threshold per group is 174 unique document touches. Again, we have heavy use in the training system that would not reflect this level of number. And certainly, if I want to know if people are exporting documents way before they get to 65 or 253 documents. But we can tweak these. We can set our own limits. So a threat manager will give you fairly accurate averages per person and per peer group. And it will evolve over time as people's behavior evolves over time. So the benefit of setting a peer group that's role specific, the averages are more precise. Again, PAs and partners and lawyers and IT people, we get more accurate averages. But if there's something here I'm particularly concerned about, exports, I can go to the ... and I can edit that threshold. That's way too high. People may be doing it a lot, but I don't want them to. And what we can do, this works on a standard deviation model, 4 times the individual user average. It's not exactly 4 times, but you know, there is maths involved here, but loosely that's how it works. And we can reduce that multiplier. So if we want this rule to be more sensitive, I might reduce it to 3.5 or 3 or even 2.5. You can actually use behavioral analytics for levers as well. So rather than using detect and protect, you could actually just create a behavioral analytics rule just aimed at a levers group, but their standard deviation, behavior deviation, is lower. So any changes in behavior will trigger more alerts. But you can simply set a fixed number. If somebody exports more than 20 documents or 10 documents in a day or 25 documents in a day, I want to know. And you can always say that should always be an urgent alert because it's particularly risky behavior. And if you do that, it will then say what you've changed. If I change the deviated threshold, you know, it will then have a little slightly different icon. So this is here if you need to tweak the settings, but out of the box, as long as you've got plenty of data, you're not brand new to Work 10, it should be fairly accurate. You can do a bit of quick analysis to see if the rule's going to work. You know, that's when we're creating the rule to see if this is actually going to do what you need it to do. Well, what we're going to do though is just activate the rule, because out of the box it should do that for you. And the rule is there, it's ready to run. But again, it will start to continuously monitor. If anybody exceeds their standard thresholds, usage for the day, you'll get the alert immediately. But we haven't got time to wait for that. So let's go to the alert list and see how they might look. Again, notifications can be added to that rule. But this is the alert list. Everything here is filterable, by the way. You can see what's been flagged and what's urgent and what's been reviewed and what hasn't been reviewed. Everything can be downloaded to a CSV for further investigation as a report. But the alerts list is ordered with the most recent alerts at the top. It's a traffic light based system. So anything in yellow is they've only slightly exceeded the thresholds. It's not particularly risky. Anything in red is riskier behavior. It generates a risk score per activity. So this is unique documents touched. We can sort this risk score. The risk score can go up to 999. If you get up to that figure, you're in real trouble. But still, it generates a risk score based on deviations from standard behavior. So this risk score is 24, and this is how it was made up. 8 points from unique document touches, 4 points from offline downloads, 4 points from exports from DMS, 8 points from view, and the percentage of how that's calculated. So we can then see for document risk score, this person downloaded 70 documents on this date. Access touched 70 documents on this date. The group average, based on the peer group in scope for this rule, was 5. The threshold was set at 13, hence the alert was generated. The individual average was 3, and the threshold was set at 11. So again, it generated an alert based on either of those thresholds, but the score is a combination of both, and it's how far away from the threshold, the deviation from the threshold, which determines the score. Offline download, again, similar thing. They downloaded 64 documents. The group average was 1. The threshold was therefore set to 1. So again, we generate an alert, and again, they viewed a large number of documents. But we may need to then drill down to investigate. This isn't telling me much. We can see there's potentially risky behavior, but is it risky or malicious? So we need to go and look. Click. And again, we get that similar dashboard. Summary of how that risk score was generated, IP ranges, rule details. It lets me remember what the thresholds were. This is more like what you would kind of expect as a threshold. Who was in scope, this is just for litigation, so this is the litigation team I expect, and who's excluded, those admin accounts, those outliers. So when we create a behavioral rule for a particular team, it's much more accurate because they're comparing this person against their peers. So again, we can then look at the trends. There is a peak of alert activity. What were they doing here? Were they going on holiday? Did they have to download a lot of documents? Offline download, let's remove that. What else did they do? They viewed a lot of documents, probably to check that they needed to download them. It's going back 10 days. Let's go back another 30 days. Has this happened before? We may just need to have a conversation with that individual. We could look at the impact. Is it particular, what documents were impacted? No, you probably need to download that into a PDF report to see, are they precedence critical? Is it standard stuff? Are these the documents that person typically would work on? The PDF report is quite nice. The CSV is kind of an Excel version of that, of course. And we can see the impact at the matter level too. Are these the matters that person would be working on? Are these the clients that person would be working on? This is an investigation tool. And again, there may be people that download documents in litigation for court submission, for bundling, for disposition. They only do that every now and again, but it's just understanding someone's typical behavior. We do have the ability to train the system. There is a robot training option. Up here, the right, we could say this is normal behavior, and this is why. I've spoken every month they need to do this. It helps train the system. So you get fewer false positives. That's useful if you've got thousands of users. It makes the results, the alerts, a bit more relevant. And that's essentially how it works. Now, the tip here, again, is thinking about how this could be applied. Certainly thinking about peer groups. Because the smaller the peer group, the more accurate the behavioral analytics, those behavioral models are. But really, it takes some thought. It does take some thought, but you've got great collateral here. And by the way, outliers, this is how we say who are the unusual users of the system that we can add to that global exclusions list. But this can be used as a tool to understand atypical behavior too. So the outliers list will be arranged based on the most atypical user of iManage. So Stefan in the past week has touched 6 unique clients, 8 unique matters, and 104 unique documents. And that the number is the unique touches. In brackets is the score. Now, a score of 0 is standard behavior across the whole team. So anybody above 0 is greater than average use, below 0, less than average use. So this is quite unusual. Now, I'm going to remove the global exclusions list because this is how it looked before we started nominating these individuals. So a couple of us use the system heavily. And if we were in a role like help desk, document production, print room, you might want to exclude those users from rules because you get tons of alerts. They increase the average, use. It affects the behavioral models. And then you can create rules which just target these users individually or as a peer group. So what we can do here is assess that somebody really uses iManage in a different way, but we can also plot that on a chart. The 3D chart lets you visualize that use. All of your standard users should be clustered together. So the red people are the people that have already been excluded from rules, the global exclusion list. Normally, these will all be blue to begin with. We're looking for, this is common behavior based on plotted against unique document touch score, client touch score, and matter touch score, the number in brackets. We can then look at people and who are these outliers? Their behavior is unusual. Laura's got a very high client touch score, document touch score, and this is only in the last week, matter touch score. And that's why she was at the top of the list. I'm only number 2. I've got a way to go. We can then click on that person, and then it gives us that breakdown again of behavior over the past week. I might increase that date range, clients impacted, matters impacted, documents impacted, and again, we can start drilling down. So it can be used for pretty useful ad hoc analysis. And again, everything's downloadable, but it's really for excluding those users from those behavioral rules or other rules, because the way I use iManage from a training perspective is not typical behavior. And again, it would make your rules less sensitive, perhaps. There's great toolkits, proactive rules, analytics rules, the all users rule. It really gives you a feel for how people are using, and we have detected things that aren't malicious at all. It's a better understanding of how people actually use iManage. And again, it could be they need more training. There's a better way to do what they're doing. It could be that there's missing integration. Sometimes people download documents to their desktop and then upload them back to iManage. How would you ever know that? Detect and protect, well, behavioral analytics can really begin to help you paint that picture. The same with compliance too. That can really help you build a picture. So yes, Threat Manager is a threat tool, but it's also a compliance tool, an adoption tool, but it's also a tool to better understand how people are using, leveraging iManage. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Or there's nothing, we can't ask them. You can pop them into the questions panel if you have them at this point.
Hi, Chris. We don't have any questions in there at the moment.
Oh, and it just timed me out of Threat Manager. Perfect timing. What I would say is think about this. There are use cases here for lots of personas, teams within your business. There's use cases for training teams, compliance teams, for IT teams, certainly, for security teams. There's no other way of really surfacing up and visualizing this. When I train customers who have this product, they literally gasp, wow, this is incredible. There's so many ways it could be used. There's so much overlap. What would be a detect and protect? What would we do behavior for? What would we, and this is the part of the conversation, the guidance that we and iManage can provide. How do we, what risk areas do people have and what's the best way to apply that? But again, I think it's an incredible toolkit, it really is. Okay, there aren't any questions. I'm happy with that. So what I will do, we'll conclude the session. Thank you all for attending. I hope it made sense. If you have any further questions, just, follow up with us. But yes, have a great day. I'll stop the session now. Take care.